So he started playing chess when he was very young. I think probably when he was a young child, around 5 or 6, maybe a little bit younger. I'm not 100% sure. But he actually retired at the age of 22. Basically, he was probably 300 to 400 points stronger than anyone else during his time period. Whereas Bobby Fischer at his peak was maybe 130 points better than Boris Spassky. So objectively, I think that's very insulting to Paul Morphy, because Bobby Fischer was just a complete scrub compared to him. First one that I'm going to go over is a game that he played against Adolf Anderssen in Paris in 1858. Now, for those of you guys who were around back then, you will remember that at that time there was not technology the way that there is now, and so much of the information people understood about openings in the game came from books from that time period. And the reason I bring that up is because the opening in this game was e4, e5, f4, ef4, knight f3, g5, h4. Now, those of us who were around back then, exactly. So this opening, this is the King's Gambit opening. Now, as I said, there was one book in particular. It was published, I believe, in 1843. It was called Bilger's Handbuch des Schachspiel. Of course, for everybody who speaks Deutsch, you will understand that it's the Handbook of chess. So that was really the sort of the Bible of chess at the time. It's the only book that was around. Thank you to Levy, by the way, for the raid with 3802. Thank you to Chess.com Turkey for the host as well with 326. Thank you so much, appreciate it, you guys. So as I was saying, there was the Handbook to Schachspiel, which basically covered all the chess knowledge up to that point that that was known. And I looked at a more modern version of it maybe about 3-4 years ago, and I remember seeing this line with g4 knight e5 in the book. Now, one thing that's amazing is this opening, of course, nowadays nearly 150 years later, no, sorry, 153 years later, it's well known this is not a great opening choice, but at the time this was not something that really was known, and the theory was very limited. Even if you read the handbook, all these lines with like queen e7 and knight f6 and d6 were not really known at the time. So yeah, so knight f6. I mean, I forget what's the German word. It's I can't say. What's the word for history? Gish. I can't remember what the word is right off. But anyway, whatever. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay, apparently everybody in chat speaks German now. Thank you for that, you guys. Thank you. Yeah, like literally everybody in chat speaks German. Thank you, you guys. Okay, this is not an English channel anymore. I might as well go and do a German collab with Papa Plata. That's what I should do, right? Or with Montana Black. Anyway, all right, you guys. So yeah. Anyway, as I was saying, this was not really well known. So at the time, they were sort of creating theory, and this is why, like, if I go back in history and you think about the great game of chess, a lot of people think there's this sort of this myth around that, you know, you have to be really, really smart or really bright to play chess well. And I think the reason that there is this sort of general belief is because in the old days, I think it generally was true. What I would say is that if you go back to say this period pre-technology, what you had is you had players at the board have to figure out ideas, come up with these concepts with no knowledge. Like, all they had were limited books with chess, and mainly was from playing. So I think there was a lot of natural talent in the game of chess that doesn't really apply anymore per se, is how I would view it. So yeah, so anyway, this opening is the King's Gambit here. White Gambit's a juicer next to the king. This is not something that's recommended these days. H4 nowadays, I think normally white can play like bishop c4 or d4, and there's even stuff like bishop c4 nowadays, but it's known. Knight e5. So Anderssen played knight f6 here. Again, I think modern day, if I remember correctly, I think queen e7 is supposed to be the best move, although even the engine is not completely clear. It's saying d6, knight g4, and bishop e7. Whoops, not king e7, not a bomb cloud. Bishop e7, and as you see from the evaluation, it gives it a big advantage for black. So yeah, nowadays, of course, if I were to play this in a blitz game, I would probably just lose, and it would be very, very unpleasant, to put it mildly. That being said, you see, even after knight f2, bishop h4, d4, the computer doesn't actually say it's so bad. So I mean, maybe I could even do some research on this and see what's going on, but I know there are ways that black is better, for sure. But in this game, of course, the players did not have access to hundreds of years worth of data. They did not have the chess engines to use, so a lot of the moves they came up with, it was original chess. Okay, so knight f6, knight takes g4 is played here by Paul Morphy, of course, trying to even out the material here. Knight takes e4 is played by Anderssen. Paul Morphy plays d3, knight g3, bishop takes f4. No, Paul Morphy was white in this game against Adolf Anderssen, the very famous German player, also one of the best players in the world at that time, but again, objectively not comparable. Now, one thing that's amazing about this game is look at this evaluation. So of course, for us as humans, of course, as us living here in the 21st century, or even the latter stages of the 20th century, in our very postmodern world, you'll notice that we can run through this game in like clickety snappity snappity in like a couple of seconds, and that's it. And you know, right away I can see, okay, well, the computer says it's equal. Okay, nice. I can just move on to whatever else I want to look at. Now, if you go back in time, however, you will realize the players did not have this, and probably this opening that Morphy played was not actually calculated before the game. He probably on the spot at the board was basically figured out this idea with bishop f4, gambiting the rook on h1 to play queen e2 and knight f6 check. So this is why when we get back to the concept of like playing chess and being a genius, I think this certainly held true in the old days prior to technology, because this is something that he came up with at the board. So knight h1 was played, Paul Morphy plays queen e2, Adolf Anderssen plays queen e7, not bishop to e7 by the way, because now you have knight f6 check. You cannot recapture the knight because then you would lose your king on e8, so it's pinned, the bishop is pinned, so you have to go king f8, and now after bishop to h6, this is actually checkmate here. The king has no squares to run to, it's currently in check from the bishop on h6, and the knight covers the other two squares, so this would be a forced checkmate here. So instead, Anderssen plays queen e7, and Morphy plays knight f6. Now, in order for Morphy to play this whole sequence, by the way, you have to see it before you go into this. So, of course, I mean, I don't. Maybe there are actually stories written about these games. Maybe there are like sort of interviews or things from the time. But my guess, based on this game, is that Morphy probably, when he played this line, he sort of had to work it out at the board or right before the game to try and figure this out, and he had no idea whether it was good or not, but it made sense. So he plays knight f6 check, king d8, and now of course you have to see bishop takes c7. Very important move, otherwise you're just down a rook in the corner, and if queens come off, black will have plenty of time to develop all these pieces which are on their original squares here. Working it out over the board, well, that's why I think to play chess at a certain time period, you had to be a genius, you had to be very, very creative. So after king d8, Morphy goes bishop takes c7 check, hitting the king on d8. King cannot go back to e8 because then you would play knight takes king. So king takes c7, knight to d5, forking the king of the queen, king to d8, knight e7, bishop e7. Now this, you guys, by the way, is one of the reasons that modern day chess is very frustrating. So as someone who grew up in this time period a little bit before computer programs were clearly established to be better than us humans, yeah, I know, you guys, exactly. So as someone who grew up in this pre-time, this position to me, like, I could very easily just set this up on the wooden board behind me and I could be very fascinated. It's like, it's fun to do the calculation and look at the game. But then when you turn on the computer, you see this lovely evaluation of 0.00, which basically says, okay, nobody cares, this is a drawn position. Now, to me, of course, it's very sad to see that, because you see white has actually given up a rook, a bishop, and a knight in return for a queen here. And at the same time, white's king isn't castled, but black has no development. And the fact that the computer says 0.00 to me is very, very sad. It's extremely sad. And this is why it's very frustrating sometimes to look at games with computers, and why I generally try not to. Like when I do commentary or live analysis, I try not to look at the engine lines as much as I can, because when you do, it's like you see 0.00 and it's like, oh my god, like, oh my god, like, it's such a fascinating position. Look at all the pieces, and the computer says 0.00, dead draw, nothing to see here, move along. So here Morphy plays queen to g4, which, by the way, is also one of the top 3 moves. It's a very logical move. A, it stops black from capturing the pawn on h4. B, it prevents the knight from coming back out to either of these squares on f2 or g3. C, it stops black from playing rook to g8 and potentially trying to take advantage of this open g file as well. So here d6 is played by Anderssen. Paul Morphy plays queen to f4. Anderssen plays rook to g8, and this got, by the way, you guys would say it still shows that these players were very good, because this idea of rook g4 and bishop h4, it's almost, I think, an only move here for black. So very, very, very good move by Anderssen. Paul Morphy plays queen takes f7. Bishop takes h4 is played. Morphy goes king to d2. and now Anderson goes rook to e8. And again, one thing that's amazing is that as you go through this, I don't know what the time control was for this game, so I'm not a historian in that sense, but again, you'll see that even though these guys were playing chess 130 plus years ago, they were still making pretty good moves. So here knight a3 is played by Morphy, and to give you an example, so when you look at this game, you're like, well, they're playing good moves. When you think about a lot of the Paul Morphy games, a lot of the games that he plays are miniatures, where he wins a game with a really nice sacrifice or a straightforward idea. And so this is probably one of the rare games where you see an opponent actually playing pretty well and defending for a long period of time, whereas most of the games he just won right out of the opening. So knight to a6 was played here by Adolf Anderson, violating one of the most basic principles that we know nowadays, which is you want to bring your knight to the center of the board. Here Anderson puts the knight on the rim. It's really not a good square to put the knight onto. Now the reasoning I think behind knight a6 here is that he didn't want to go knight d7 because that closes a diagonal for development of the bishop. So I think that's the main reason he did that. Knight c6 also, he probably was afraid of something like knight to b5 with some kind of idea of queen c7 or knight takes d6 or even knight c7 forking the rooks on a8 and e8. So that's why he plays knight a6. Now the problem with knight a6 is it does kind of take away this knight c7 idea. At the same time though, your knight isn't really coming to the center of the board, because even if you get to c5, my pawn always prevents the knight from coming to e4 here. So it's not a very good move. And now here Paul Morphy plays queen to h5. Very good move, hitting the bishop and the knight. If you move the bishop, you are going to lose your knight on h1. Bishop to f6 is played. Yeah, Morphy's knight is on the edge of the board too. This is actually true, although for Morphy, he did it because it was an exception to the rule. If you put the knight on c3 here, instead of putting the knight on a3, black can now go bishop to g5, and your king no longer has space to run. So in the position with knight a3, if black makes a check, you can run the king to c3 here. So that's the reason Morphy did. There was more objective reasoning behind his move, because he didn't put the knight in the center of the board. So queen h5, bishop to f6. Morphy plays queen takes h1, and now here Anderson blunders with bishop takes b2. Potentially he could have tried bishop g5, but after king to c3, bishop f6, white very simply plays pawn to d4, closes that diagonal. If rook to e3, just bishop to d3. King is very safe. Black still is lacking in development, and white is completely winning here. So therefore in this position, Adolf Anderson plays bishop takes b2. But now Paul Morphy plays queen to h4 check. Why not queen h7? Which move? Oh, instead of queen h5, the reasoning is because now black can play bishop to g5 check. King moves and I keep my horse in the game. So queen h7 would be a bad move because specifically it lets black get both the pieces off this diagonal. Whereas when you play queen h5 here, if the bishop can't go here because you just capture, if here you capture, and if black moves the bishop like he does in the game, you lose the knight, and otherwise you lose the bishop. So queen h5 is a very, very important move to be played here. And again, this is it's amazing when you see this. Is this a Gadmator's channel? Very funny. So queen h1, bishop takes b2, and now after queen h4, Anderson goes king d7. If he were to play rook to e7, Morphy could play rook e1, and the rook is pinned because if you move the rook, you lose your king. So there's no way really to salvage this rook on e7 here. And after king to d7, rook to b1, bishop takes a3, queen a4. Here Adolf Anderson resigned in view of the fact that after you move the king to d8, queen takes a3. Black still is a rook and a knight for the queen, but neither piece is really in the game. Pawn on d6 is weak. The black king is very open here, and white's rook is also on a great file. So because of that, Anderson resigned in this position, and Morphy won a very, very nice game. So yes, this I will say is it does show in general how amazing players were, but it's also kind of crazy too if you think about it. I can turn off the engine, but I'll just leave it on for you guys. But what I would say is that when you think about it, this game was played in 1858. This game was played 160 plus years ago, and it's amazing when you think about it. If these guys could imagine that their games from that long ago were still being looked at now, you know how amazing that would be. Like I sometimes think about that myself, and that's one of the reasons a lot of people, when they think about chess, they view it as sort of an art. It's like I have a couple of my own games, like against Gelfand or Krasenkow, which I would say are my two best games that I've ever played, and those games, people will be looking at those games 100 years after I'm dead. And so it is like one of those things where it's amazing historically to have all these old games being looked at. All right. So what games? I'll get to my games in a couple of months, you guys. But anyway, so this is the first Paul Morphy game I want to go over. It was a really nice game. It shows how well he saw tactics. Like, and one thing that I've stressed a lot is that in terms of chess and general improvement and trying to get really good, I think you can go very far with some basic openings and really good tactical awareness, seeing a lot of these puzzles where like bishop c7, knight d5 fork. For a long time I believed you can probably get to like 2200, like master level, if your tactics are really good. You have to know some openings, but if you know some basic openings and you're really sharp on the tactics, I think you can get to about 2200 level.